welcome everyone. We'll love to see your videos if you're able to go on. Hi, Alessia, Dan, Eileen. I think we have Veronica and Ollie and Boris dialing in from Kenya. So people from all over the world. We've got someone from the UK. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. In fact, why don't you, as you're joining, throw in the chat where you're calling in from, since we have a global group here and more to come. So welcome to the Flourishing at Work monthly meeting. I am so excited to have Paul Zak here. I'm going to just read a quick bio of Paul, and then I'm going to turn it over to him because he has so much to share. Dr. Paul Zak is a distinguished university professor at Claremont Graduate University and is in the top 0.3% of most cited scientists. Paul's 2 decades of research extending the boundaries of behavioral neuroscience have taken him from the Pentagon to Fortune 50 boardrooms to the rainforest of Papua New Guinea. His most recent book is Immersion, The Science of the Extraordinary and the Source of Happiness, which is a fantastic book. Besides his academic appointment, he is a 4-time tech entrepreneur. In 2017, he founded Immersion Neuroscience, a software platform that allows anyone to measure what the brain loves in real time, that is used to improve outcomes in entertainment, education, advertising, and emotional health, and of course, the promotion of flourishing. He's a regular TEDx speaker, has appeared on Good Morning America, Dr. Phil, Fox and Friends, ABC Evening News, and his work has been reported in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Time, The Economist, Scientific American, Fast Company, Forbes, and others. Also he's going to talk about, I'm sure, the emotional fitness app called Six. So he is joining us today to talk about the neurophysiologic measure of flourishing. The measure of adult flourishing is whether people obtain sufficient value from activities of daily living. His lab's identification of the brain's social emotional valuation network and the development of an app, Six, to continuously measure this value has enabled them to measure flourishing at scale. They've quantified the neural value needed to maintain, grow, or have a decline in mood and energy using these data. Look Paul up if you haven't already. He has such a diverse and interesting background and has researched and written and spoken on so many interesting things. Welcome. He's so generous to be here. Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karen. You're the best. And I'll just stop there. Karen covered everything. So I do have a couple of slides, and I really love to have a conversation with all of you. So small group, feel free to interrupt me anytime. I really have like 12 slides. So just to kind of level set and kind of tell you what you're doing and what we're doing, and would love to get feedback from you all. So we're all colleagues, so we should, have a nice conversation. So I have a new book coming out in May on happiness. So I'll tell you a little about that and the kind of data we've been collecting. So I really think there are 5 pillars that make up thriving. Diet, exercise, sleep. We know all about that. Recent research out of Oxford University showed that about 50% of people's self-reported happiness is due to the quality of their social relationships. And then we'll talk a little about purpose as well. So lots of apps to knock out the first 3. But if half of our happiness is due to having a rich social network, that's an area we should really put some effort on. And that's what I've focused on for the last 20 years or so. So the problem with that statement is the word rich to me. Maybe the word engage as well. What does rich mean? Compared to what? What's the basis for that? So I want to tell you how we drilled into that and got a physiologic measure of what it means to have a rich social network. This will also reflect back on purpose as well. So let's talk about that. So when we really think about the diet, exercise, and sleep components, I mean, those are absolutely essential. But if people are lonely, if they're socially withdrawn, if they're depressed, well, they don't sleep well, and they don't eat, and they don't exercise. So again, none of those 5 pillars are independent of each other for sure. But to really thrive, we need to have kind of a full, complete portfolio of factors that help us really want to get out of bed in the morning, have that high energy, that positive mood. And as you guys know, this data as well as anybody, people are really not thriving. So we see a lot of employee burnout at work. When I speak to organizations, probably like you do, I always tell them, look at the 60-year low unemployment rate in the US, and we've been below replacement fertility since 2010, right? All of Europe is below replacement fertility. I was in South Korea recently, the lowest fertility rate in the world in South Korea. We're losing humans fast, or we're not replacing humans fast enough. So if you've got employees, you should really think about not only their physical health, but their emotional health, right? So I don't want these people to get burnout, to quit, to go work somewhere else or drop out of the labor force. And so I think there's a real call for this in organizations. And we see this across the world as well. And as I said earlier, when people are lonely or depressed or unhappy, we see this increase in obesity as well. Here's that fertility rate, so you can see these data. You guys know all this, so I'm doing this fast. But this is worse in Japan, worse in China. I was in Japan with my daughter a couple years ago, and we saw one baby in 2 weeks, and we're like, "Oh my God, a baby! Wow, one person had a baby." So, um, we really have to take care of the humans. Here's some recent data. This ends in 2020, which is a weird year, but the trends are about the same. Little bounce back after the COVID stuff, but time spent alone, not so good, right? So again, this is self-reported data, but I think we should be worried about the lack of social interaction. And certainly for young people, if you had younger people at home who couldn't go out of the house for a year and a half, you kind of lose those social skills. Certainly my kids did, and maybe me too. Who knows? So how do we work against this? How do we really help people flourish and not only improve their lives personally, but also professionally? So again, I tend to work with companies like many of you do. And I think it's really important that we understand, uh, contra what people are told in business school, you can't be friends with people you work with if you supervise them. No, that's what humans do. We form friendships all the time. It's totally natural for us. If you supervise people at work, they're aware. They're aware who writes the checks. It's no big deal. You can go to happy hour with them. So it's totally normal to build these relationships. And a lot of smart companies that I've seen or worked with really facilitate that social attachment with employees. It really improves interpersonal trust and teamwork, makes work more enjoyable. So I think there's a lot we can do. I was in San Francisco 2 weeks ago. I saw this billboard. Holy moly. Is that where we're at now? So this is for an AI company, but you know, I I, I want to help the humans be happier. I don't want to stop hiring them. I think they need jobs, because we get so much of our satisfaction from work as well, right? Work is really about service to others. That's why we get paid, because we're helping someone live a better life, be happier at some level. So I don't think we should stop hiring humans. I get that it's advertising, I know, but at the same point, um, kind of hurts me in my heart to think we don't want to hire humans. Um, okay, so as Karen said, I have a pretty active, not pretty, I have a very active behavioral neuroscience lab at Claremont Graduate University. And the origin of this work was post 9/11, when we got a lot of funding from the U.S. Department of Defense and other agencies that tasked us with identifying a combination of neural signals that would accurately and consistently predict what people would do after a message or an experience. So we were funded by your tax dollars to create a neurologic test bed for influence. And the idea was very noble. Could we give soldiers better persuasion ability so we can use words rather than weapons to try to encourage um, other countries or other groups to cooperate with U.S. goals? At a first cut, I like that. Let's at least try to talk to people, and let's be very effective in how they talk to people. So as we did this data, we discovered something that you guys all know already, which is the brain's a very lazy organ. It takes so much energy to have that brain run at full speed that it really is evolved to stay in idle mode most of the time. So as we measured all these signals in the brain at very high frequency, about 140 signals in the central and peripheral nervous system, up to 1,000 times a second, we began to statistically winnow down those signals that did not consistently predict what people would do. Uh, we eventually identified what, by all accounts, is the valuation network that the brain uses for social emotional experiences. So the link here is that if that organism evaluates the information or the experience I'm having as sufficiently valuable, then it will invest the metabolic energy to fully process that information, and therefore that organism can be influenced. There's no brainwashing here, but it's how do I communicate in the most effective way? So by trying to figure out the brain basis for influence or persuasion, almost as a byproduct, we end up discovering this valuation network that's a combination of multiple signals. I'll tell you what those are in a second. Because we've done unnatural things in natural data, I had to give them a new term. I've called that immersion, because when people have these high immersion moments, they're kind of lost in the moment. So, but it's a combination of neurosignals. And we trace this back to the action of frontal dopamine associated with being present or being attentive to this situation, and oxytocin, particularly in the brainstem and subgenual cortex, that is associated with emotional resonance. So these two factors and the electrical activity they induce appear to be how the brain values these experiences that are social emotional. So if I'm drinking my glass of water, if you guys weren't here, you're here, you're looking at me. So I get some social emotional value from that, but wouldn't be much, that's not what we're capturing. That would be much more of a pure kind of midbrain dopamine response. This is really a different kind of network in which that organism again is assessing, should I invest the metabolic resources in processing this experience. So again, as much as I like Karen, if my daughters come and give me a hug, bigger immersion experience, right? So, Karen, I'll get a nice, nice moderate experience, and then, someone I don't know, not so much, right? Because we're balancing, should I really engage with this person or not? So, this is a PET imaging study of oxytocin binding, unpublished research from my lab. So you actually can see where the density of those receptors are for oxytocin. So we traced out this pathway doing drug studies. So we use pharmaceuticals to manipulate dopamine and oxytocin. And then I'm a prediction guy, right? I don't really care about feelings. Actually, I don't even think feelings exist. So we could have a discussion about that. I could use some therapy maybe. But I'm a mechanism or physiology guy. And so once we traced out this network, pardon me, to make it useful, we said, well, how do we get these signals without imaging your brain or having you wear a, 128 lead EEG? And so we found we could actually get these signals from the cranial nerves. So I think of the cranial nerves as the brain's output file, right? So we're looking at network effects, and at the level of the brain with EEG or fMRI, we're getting disaggregated signals. But we found that we could trace out these very subtle changes in cranial nerve activity by feeding in heart rate, and then we wrote algorithms let us transform that into these very subtle kind of third and fourth order changes in heart rhythms that we traced back to the effects of dopamine and oxytocin. So happy to go through more about how we did that. But the punchline here is that there's a 1 second frequency convolution of signals that we can capture with, sort of a longish algorithm that we put in the cloud. And then the sort of magic of this solution from an application perspective is that once we linked immersion to these very subtle changes in cardiac rhythms, then we had a scalable technology because we can pull these data from any old smartwatch or fitness wearable when we apply the right algorithms to it. So, lots of publications. I'm almost done, you guys. I'm like 7 more minutes. Lots of publications. So once we found this valuation network, you can really start asking some interesting questions, like how accurately can we predict things like mood and energy? And then we started thinking about all my good friends who are psychiatrists who live in this world of not having assays like other physicians do. And I thought these poor people, right? They have to do these clinical evaluations. Um, I spent a lot of time with psychiatry residents, and it's so hard for them to figure out how to not listen to patients who are mentally ill, right? By design, they're not going to tell you, you know, exactly what they're doing, depending on the extent of their illnesses, and really assess the other factors. Talk to the family, observe them behaviorally. That it just takes some training to get over that. And so I thought, what does a psychiatrist need? What kind of assay would be simple for them? And I thought, oh yeah, they understand integers. So could we count how many high immersion moments people need in a well-defined sense to really thrive? And when we did that analysis and published it, we found that the number is six. So six experiences lasting 3 minutes or longer that are, think of this as your baseline uh, uh, immersion activity. So baseline neurologic activity plus one standard deviation above. So if you're above baseline plus one standard deviation, it's just a little bit more complicated than that, but not a lot more. If I can sustain that very high metabolic investment in an experience, this is really valuable. And if you have six or more of those a day, then you're really building up what I call your emotional fitness. So I was trying to find a really neutral term that would not be scary. Mental health, I think, is scary. I think emotions can be scary, but we know from lots of research, from lots of labs, that when people are thriving, they're engaged in life, they're expending this energy, they're passionate, they're engaged with other people. So how do we communicate this in an effective way? So I like to use the word emotional fitness or the term emotional fitness. And this is, I believe, as Karen said, the first physiologic measure of thriving. Are you doing enough in life that you are passionate, you're turned on, you're excited, you're putting energy in? Um, we find in the published research we've done that if you have three or fewer of these well-defined high-value moments a day, that you have depressive symptoms. You have low mood and low energy. And by the way, one of the nice things we found in the publications is that people have fewer high-value moments when they're sick, physically sick. Well, that makes sense, right? That means face validity. Of course, when I'm not feeling well, I'm not engaged in life, right? So when we see people who are not getting enough social emotional value, the first factor is, are you physically healthy? Okay, awesome. Are you now emotionally healthy? Let's assess that. And then, are you lonely? Are you engaged in life? Are you excited about your job, about your friends, about your family? So there's lots of ways to assess this. So as Karen said, we launched a free app a couple years ago. I'll give you a QR code in a sec that you can use as well. And maybe like a lot of you, unfortunately, I don't care anything about money, and I just want 1 billion people on the planet to have this tool to measure and discuss emotional fitness in a non-judgmental way, in a fun way. You can share your data with your friends so people can be on this emotional fitness journey with you. There's no writing, there's no journaling, there's nothing to do. It runs in the background continuously and will show you if you are reaching this very simple goal of having six key moments a day. And it links to your calendar, so it guides people on what they're doing that their brain finds most valuable. And then here's the secret. Maybe it's an evil secret. The secret is that almost all those high value moments involve other people. So now we're coming back to the Oxford research. If I want to have a rich social life and that's important to my thriving, I've got to know which activities, with whom, when, that would really be useful, right? So when I hang out with Karen, awesome. We have so much fun. We have high value moments, great. And then when I hang out, I have to pick on someone else in the group. When I hang out with Dan, oh, those are the worst experiences ever. So the app, actually, we've I don't even know Dan. I'm just picking on him because he's smiling. So what we've done is trained a large language model in the app that will start giving you prospective advice because the app knows your calendar and knows about what's you value the most. By the way, it stays private. No one sees that, just private to you. And then if you're going to have a Dan meeting, like, oh God, those meetings, have 2 cups of coffee beforehand. So, and Karen meeting, oh Josh, strap in. It's going to be awesome. So that's the sense in which we're trying to help people curate their lives for better happiness by just having this insight into your underlying emotional state that is always not always available consciously. So you get these little bubbles that we've made. Again, this is version 2, so we've been working on this for a while to make it really easy and fun. We're device agnostic, and for companies who are using this, they can offer this as an employee benefit. They can use our enterprise interface to grab anonymized data and then look at potential interventions to improve employee thriving. So that's why I said when we're running out of people, I really need to think about, are my employees thriving? Some published research has shown that people have more self-reported high value moments at work than they do at leisure. At work, we have goals, we have challenges, and we have other people depending on us. So that really is the formula for having these key moments. Having said that, we want to make sure we're also having key moments outside of work. We have a number of police departments using the technology now, the 6 app. And when I talk to police departments, I always say, hey, you guys are going to, if you've ever worked with police officers, it's like boredom, 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 super exciting. Something's happening now, and then that goes away. So they're going to have key moments at work. That's just the nature of policing. But I said, if you never get key moments outside of work, that's not going to be good for your home life, right? That's not sustainable. If you come home and you're so wiped out that you can't interact with your husband or wife or with your kids or with your friends. So really think about maybe taking half an hour to hang out with your friends or have a beer before you go home, or refresh that energy so that you can actually have a engaging conversation with the people outside of work. Most cops I know, they don't want to talk to their families about the bad things they saw that day. They don't want to burden their families on that. But you do want to have some kind of conversation with your family. And so I think having that balance between getting these high value moments at work and outside of work, and then have these, people you can see. So again, if you share this data with others, they don't see all your data. They'll see your calendar. They just see how many key moments that you're getting. Hey, Connor, no key moments, right? So if I see that my friend Connor hasn't had a key moment in 3 or 4 days, the app lets you send him an emoji or a heart, thumbs up, whatever. Or God forbid, for those of us with gray hair, I could call up Connor. Hey, buddy, you shared your data with me. Looks like you're not doing so well. Then you say, oh, well, I got the flu. Okay, I understand that. Cool. I'll send you some soup. Or, I just been a little bit out of it recently. I'm like, dude, let's go grab a coffee. Let's go hang out. Right? That's how we actually can promote thriving with our own communities. And I think that is a whole different kind of conversation. And even though we all know that, having a little piece of technology nudge you to remember to connect to the people you care about the most, I think is super important. That's a demo of what the organizational enterprise interface looks like. And it's this nice 2x2 matrix that everybody loves. The vertical axis is the immersion. This is average over a day. And we also do able to physiologic measure, I call psychological safety. We derive this from vagal tone. And so when I think of this 2x2 matrix, so in this lower left corner, people who are not psychologically safe and they're just disengaged from work or life. That's not doing so well. People in the upper right corner are doing great. They're super passionate. They're engaged. They're getting high value moments. They're comfortable. They're having their best life. So for organizational interventions, we really want to move the proportion of people from the lower left quadrant to the upper right quadrant. So that's a way to have a consistent measure of organizational health and the value of interventions to improve employee thriving. So we've actually got some data on job satisfaction and the value of social connection. This is in published research from my group. And so I really think of this as this kind of feedback. So this is data from working adults in the US. What I really like is for people who have strong social connections, they're getting sick less and they're more satisfied with their lives outside of work, right? Great, they have greater job satisfaction, great, they innovate more. That's all cool. But that these people are also objectively healthier and happier, I think that's exactly the space I want to play in. So finally, sorry, I went too fast. So finally, in the digital health space, they talk about the 4 Ps, and we've built all of this into the 6 apps so that it's fun, it's gamified, it's shareable, and it strongly predicts people's outcomes. And just having a measure and a language to talk about thriving, I think, is super important. So, and then what do you do? Well, this little book of happiness I have coming out in May basically is a workbook on how to be a better human. So it's really about the scientific basis for the 45 roughly cardinal virtues. So how do I connect better to people around me? I've got to practice the virtues. This is what Ben Franklin did because he wanted to be happier. Is he had some virtuous behaviors and made a giant sheet on his wall and started checking them off and try to practice them every day. And with a little scientific foundation, this book does the same thing. And if people use the 6 app, then they can track their progress. And so, how do I build those social relationships? How do I strengthen them? I invest in those relationships. I've got to be a better human. I've got to take care of the people around me so I get that reciprocal strength of the relationship. Finally, in my last 1.27 minutes, um, purpose. So when we look at purpose, which you guys all know is very important to thriving as well, it almost always involves other people. So if I want to have my, practice my avocation, and if that is sailing or rock climbing or volunteering in my kid's school, right? I'm not going to do any of those alone, playing tennis, right? I'm going to do it with almost always with other people. And so even though I may get a high value moment if I rock climb by myself, if I'm rock climbing in the gym, outdoors, I'm doing it with other people almost always. And so that purpose component, just having a measurement to remind individuals that acting on your purpose also provides these key value moments to help you thrive. Again, we know that intuitively, but by having a measure for this, I think it makes it easier to remember that having the sense of purpose is really important to everybody. Oh my gosh, I talked nonstop for half an hour. How did I do that? I think as I'd love to have a conversation with you guys, and since I picked on Dan, Dan, you get the first question, and a good skeptical question would be great. Happy to dig in more of the science or the application or how it's being used, but go for it.
Thank you, Paul. Fantastic. And yes, I was smiling the whole time. I love this kind of stuff. I'm a soft scientist, a very, very, very soft scientist relative to anything you've just presented. But this is an area that is close to my heart. So I've got 4 or 5 questions. So maybe I'll just start with one and pass it to others and see if some of the others are discussed. But this is a bit of a science question, but it is the data that informs your relationship between thriving and dopamine and oxytocin a linear relationship, or is it somehow an attenuated S curve? Meaning, is there a limit to maximizing your thriving, or can you continue to prompt yourself with social interaction, key moments, and other things to thrive more and more and more and more, almost limitless? If
Uh,
that makes
so I have to disagree with you completely. That's such a great neuroscience question. You're not a soft scientist. That is a deep question. So yeah, um, yes, and is the answer. So what we find in the data is that there are physiologic limits to this, but as people have more of these thriving moments, then they're essentially expanding the capacity to have more of them. So you potentiate these pathways and you strengthen those connections between the neurons in that pathway, which means now it becomes easier to get those high value moments. So what we do in the app is the app starts to learn about you. So if you never get them, so we start with a population average on what it means to have a high value moment. If you never reach that, we lower that. So everyone's different, and it's removing people's baseline. So it's all changed from baseline because everyone's baseline is different. But if you're getting a lot of those high value moments, and I'll tell you who those people are in a minute, then we're going to make that threshold a little higher. We're going to begin to push you. So think of this as like 10,000 steps, right? So which is just, by the way, just made up. There's no science behind 10,000 steps. So if you're getting like 5,000 steps, then the app should, generally try to increase, your go to 6,000 and then go to 7. So this is the same kind of thing where we're gamifying this approach so that people can build up that capacity. Now, as you suggested, there's going to be an upper limit on that. But we do see people who will get 14, 15, 20 high value moments a day. And we actually have characterized those people. You can probably guess who they are, but I'll just tell the group. People who, by personality, are highly empathic and people who are agreeable, right? So, what does that mean? Those are the warm people. They're the people. They're the folks you want to be around, right? They tend to have a lot more friends. They tend to be happier. They're joyful. They pull people towards them. And so, those individuals are, you know, already super connected, super connected. So yeah, does that make sense? That
Yeah,
yeah,
it does. It's sort of there's a population average, but an individual could have an increasing capacity and become potentially the Dalai Lama in 1,000 years
yeah,
because
right.
they keep working at it.
And I should say I'm the this saying in psychology, right? All research is me search. So I'm a big introvert. I'm not a super warm person in general. I'm trying to get better just by personality. And when I started doing this research 20 years ago, I'm like, oh, I've got to take my own research seriously, and I've got to really invest in relationships. Don't spend 15 hours in a lab. I'm not a big talker. I'm an introvert, and so I would come home. I went, "How was your day?" I'm like, fine. I don't want to talk about it because it's over. I don't want to revisit, you know. And anyway, that's not great for relationships, right? So I began thinking, oh, I've got to actually invest in relationships. So I'm 60 now. I turned 50, and I had 4 surprise birthday parties. Not because I'm so wonderful, because I invested in different relationships, and people remembered it was a kind of a big decadal birthday. So I think that says, even if a doofus like me can improve their social life, then other people can too. Thank you,
Thank you.
Dan.
I'm going to jump in really quick and then I'll turn it over. But Paul, so how are we as humans at predicting our own key moments or immersion moments?
Great question, Karen. Yeah, terrible. We're totally terrible. So when we run these scientific studies, we do ask people, do you enjoy this? This doesn't predict at all. So I think, we still have this underlying uh, cartoonish view of the brain of this little homunculus in there pulling levers, and there's someone in charge. There's someone in charge, just an organism, right? So, just like breathing, why would we um, be aware of breathing? It would take if I had to think about breathing, it would take too much, brain space. So. That's why I say I believe in emotions and not in feelings. So again, emotions are the physiologic response to your environment. So yeah, I think in the extreme, Karen, of course, we know the extremes. When my kids tell me they love me, that's awesome. And I can probably guess that that's a high value moment. But doing different activities or I don't know, hanging out with my friends or watching sports. How do I kind of curate my life for better happiness? It's really hard to know, and journaling only gets you so far. I think journaling's fine, by the way. I have no problem with it. It's just that I think of this as frictions for the humans, right? Unless you're really compelled to journal, like you're getting treated for a mental health disorder, most people just don't want to do it, or they don't do it for very long. But having something that's continuous and designed to be predictive, I think is a easier solution. I'm into easy, right? You've seen the humans; they're a pretty lazy lot.
We sure are. Maren, did you have a question? I see your hand raised.
I do. I'm sorry, I still need to be off camera, but
Sure.
I heard you talking about how the social moments tend to create these peaks better, but also that more of them happen at work. And I just still wasn't quite clear on, uh, like getting into a flow at work with my work and without people is what drives me and gives me
Mhm.
a lot of satisfaction. So, how do we know that differentiation between what's creating these moments and how to cultivate them? What just, yeah, how do we enhance that and understand that?
It's a great question, and certainly people do have by themselves high value moments, and it likely varies by personality type as well. So introverts, if you're an introvert like me, I'm happy to be by myself for 10 hours a day or whatever, and feel very fulfilled if I've made progress on whatever I'm doing. But in general, um, adding a human to the experience adds the value. So, for example, we've done a lot of research on education and like corporate training programs. And this 2D things, okay, it's fine. But shoulder to shoulder in the same room, immersion is much higher, and immersion correlates with not only the enjoyment of the experience, but information recall, right? Your brain's putting a lot more energy into processing that. So from a kind of corporate training perspective or meeting perspective, yeah, being there in person is super valuable. So I think by having the app linked to your calendar, you actually can see when you have those high value moments, and of course, some of those will be by themselves. Again, for the people who are agreeable and who are extroverts, who are spending more time with other humans, they're probably going to find more of those with involve other people. Mary, did I answer your question or did I just dance around it? I think I got it, she said.
Sorry, trying to get off mute. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
sorry. Thank you for that question. Aisha, hi.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for this presentation.
Sure.
Love the idea and application. I wanted to ask just one question about this feeling of like what is flourishing, like what does it even mean to be well, right? I know we all think about this all the time, and as I'm understanding it, this is a measure of engagement, like being really actively involved and valuing your experience. And I wonder if you think there is, because there is this idea of like, if you look at some alternative paradigms of well-being, like the Buddhist literature or maybe non-Western context, like the idea of peace and balance and non-attachment, and which could mean I'm not saying it is, but I'm actually curious about what you think about it. That we are not like super highly wired to our experience, neither, that we have a certain level of detachment and peace. So I wondered if you feel, especially going back to Dan's question as well, that this kind of immersion at one point is actually linked to some amount of stress at some point because of the level of immersion. And also, if you think there could be maybe like more mid level, like there is like a mid-level of being here that still provides you that sense of peace and non-attachment, but at the same time you're fully alive and present.
A plus question, and you're 100% correct. And yeah, Dan did suggest this as well. So in biology, there's something called the Yerkes-Dodson law, this sort of inverted U curve you find everywhere in biology, where moderate levels of physiologic arousal improve memory, improve performance, multiply measured. And that's what we see with immersion. And that's why we put in this measure psychological safety. So um, Dan's brother-in-law who sits on the couch playing video games all day, that dude's under aroused. He's got to get a life, right? You got to move on. So that's not good. But then Ollie's too stressed out, and he can't even focus because he's trying to get through the next 10 minutes. So we want to be somewhere in the middle, but this is sort of episodic. I want to have these periods in which I'm really in and really focused. And so I'm at Claremont Graduate University. Mike Csikszentmihalyi, who invented this idea of flow, was my colleague for 10 years. Mike just passed away last year. And so this is a little different than flow. Flow, again, is self-reported. Flow has to be an active task, but it's kind of like that in that I'm just all in, and people do in high immersion moments get lost in time or kind of lose time. But you can have a highly immersive moment that's passive. I could watch a movie and be totally immersed in that. In the idea of flow, you couldn't be, at least in the classical version of it. So I want to have these moments where I'm just all in. All right, I'm just like, oh, this is awesome. So I live by the beach in San Diego, and I have a dog, and every morning I walk my dog, and pre-dawn, and everywhere I live is hills. So any direction I go, I have to climb a hill. And at 5 in the morning this morning, I did not want to walk up that hill in the cold with my stupid dog who's got to pee and poop. But I just forced myself to do it every day. And then I have that good sense of like, okay, I went up this steep hill. I walked for a mile and a half this morning before I had my coffee and whatever. And I've oxygenated my brain. I've got some energy flowing, right? So that's kind of my ritual. And for me, that's really important. And then I would come back and rest and have coffee and have some breakfast and, and then get to my workday. So I think if we can find those things that become rituals that help us reach that state, and then we can come back and recover. So I, like you, maybe I'm trying to be very Buddhist as I get older. I'm trying to get rid of all my stuff. I try to simplify my life and just focus on those factors that give me the most value because, I've only got 30 more years on the planet, so I'm going to make it count. Does that make sense, Aisha? Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that
it makes
question
sense.
so much. I mean, hey, you guys are asking super smart questions. I see Eileen got a hand up. Hi.
Thanks for this. And I have to say, before this, I've been trying to get on to Six app so I could play with it before this. So it actually relates to my question. We have some computer science folks here at at Harvard who work to get people on clinical trials monitored through apps. And it's hard to keep people on an app for more than 3 weeks, 6 weeks tops. And I'm wondering with this subject matter, does it change?
That's a great question. I don't have a good answer for you. So we've been doing this for about 2 years, and version one was not very fun and gamified, and version two we launched in October. And there's melt off for every even for free. So we find about if it's shared like in a group in a company, we'll find about between 10 and 20% of people will start using the app, and then about half those will be off within a month. So there's probably a selection bias in there for people who either really find it valuable or, are just interested or are nerds. Um, it's very hard. When we've done clinical studies with the app, we started just getting people's phone numbers. And so the app will actually remind you every morning at 8 a.m. to turn it on. When we've done work with older folks, we actually automated the turning it on. So we just turn on automatically, right? Now, you still have to have a smartwatch or fitness wearable. So you got to remember to charge that overnight. So if we didn't see data coming in, we would just send them a text message like, hey, you're in our trial. Please turn your app on. So anyway, I don't have a good solution, but that's what we did. It's just we became bothersome. Now, these were older people, and they actually were super nice about, they consented to let us text them if they forgot to turn it on.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Kat, hi.
Yes, hi. So I've been trying the app for the last 5 days, and I was actually really surprised to find that although I'm an introvert, I was in some fairly high stress moments, like giving a presentation at Toastmasters that really showed a key moment. So that, just to reinforce what you're saying about it may be stressful, but it's still considered a key moment in a social context. My actual question is it possible to look for moments that are the inverse? So you're looking for key moments that are these levels of high value, high safety, but are there moments that are the inverse that really create high stress or, like the opposite? Because I research failure in an entrepreneurial context, and what I'm looking for is the zone where it's very hard to recover from. Does my question make sense?
Tell me a little more. Are you sort of talking about sort of post-traumatic growth or creativity?
I'm talking about a self-perceived measure of failure where it would really be the inverse of a key moment. It would be below a certain threshold of safety or of value where I just feel like I'm really disconnected or I don't belong, something like that.
Got it. Yeah. And those are super valuable. So yeah, the Apple, so I call those frustration. So I'm present. I'm just not getting an emotional value from this. It's just not fun. I'm here, but it's just not enjoyable. And so that's a big trough in immersion. And we've actually published research showing that those frustration points also help predict whether people are thriving or not. So in a negative sense. So again, think of high value. Think of this as happy and sad, and that's too simple, or even simplistic. But if I'm thriving, I'm getting more of those high value, enjoyable moments and fewer of those frustration moments. And yet that frustration time can be very valuable. So it's like the evolutionary explanation for depression. So one of the explanations on why people get depressed is you're having a crisis, so stop. Just stop and stay in bed for a month and try to figure out what the heck to do because whatever you're doing is not working. So I think failure can be the same way where, okay, I've tried everything, now I'm stuck and I'm just going to be frustrated for a while and I'll have this sort of cognitive emotional process that tries to help me get out of this failure mode. Is that what you're thinking, Kat?
That's exactly what I'm thinking. And I'm linking it to duration. Like, is there a duration of time where we're stuck in that frustration that becomes detrimental?
Good science question. I don't have an answer for that, but I think it's measurable. So you have my email, I'm sure, or just Google me, it'll come up. Let's chat about that offline. That's a wonderful kind of study we could do. So I'm super curious about it. I think it's a good question.
Fantastic. I'll be in touch.
Thank you. And I see one more, Boris McGuire.
Ollie also had a question. Ollie with an
Oh,
O,
I'm sorry.
but he doesn't know how to put his hand up. So I'll put a plug in for him. There he is.
Okay.
I still can't see how to put my hand up. Honestly, I can see recognized hand gestures, but I'll jump in the queue in front of Boris.
Oh, go ahead. You've got the floor. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Firstly, thanks for the great presentation, Paul. When you showed us all those statistics, it looked like a pretty grim picture. You know, things like decreasing birth replacement rates, increased obesity, increased or decreased social engagement. How long has the headline statistic of, and I can't remember how you phrased it, I think it was, you know, how often you're flourishing, whether it's often, sometimes, rarely, never. Was that right? I can't remember the question, but I was curious to know how long that headline statistic has been tracked for over time, and can we see how that is changing over the generations?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I pulled that from other people's research. So it's not my original research. So I'm not going to know the details on that off the top of my head. But I think the trend has been mostly downward. So if we just look at mental health disorders, right, we see just an explosion of this in the last 20 years, particularly among younger people. Suicide rates, I have a talk where I talk about mental health. And in the US, if you're over 15, between 15 and 75, suicide's in the top 10 causes of death, most common causes of death. It's in the top 3 for most age groups. Suicide. It's a freaking huge problem. And there's evidence that it's been getting worse. So we really have to ask what the causes are. And I don't claim to be an expert in all of that, but it's certainly been a long-term trend. It doesn't seem like it's getting any better. A lot of people have speculated, but I think the evidence is very mixed. Some of you here may know much better than me, but I do think we have to be proactive about our emotional fitness. So again, I don't want to talk about mental health. That puts me in the clinical world. I want to be before the clinical world. I want to have some kind of technology that helps me be a better me, and helps me join my friends and have this discussion about emotional fitness. What we're seeing from the uptake of 6 in particular is businesses are really worried about losing employees now. And so we're getting a lot of uptake in which businesses offer this as an employee benefit because they're interested in keeping their their businesses fully staffed. And so I don't care how this gets in people's hands. I just care that we have a way to discuss this in a non-judgmental and in a caring way. And I'm hoping we can do that with 6. Oli, did that answer your question? Or did I just...
Yeah, and apologies, my camera keeps turning itself off for some reason. It's really interesting because your app is, I mean, it's fantastic what you're doing, and it's it's clear that we need to take responsibility at an individual level, but it also suggests that something on a societal level is going seriously wrong. You know, and it makes me wonder whether we should almost have like a ministry for happiness. You know, we have Department of Education, we have Department of Health, you know, but whether we've got any real kind of government focus on the kind of overall well-being that people are experiencing in their lives. You know, it seems that there needs to be more focus there.
I totally agree. So the state I live in the U.S., California, has a bill that's being, evaluated by the legislators on having a Department of Happiness, and they're talking to us about using our free app to assess, whether people in California are happy, whether policy changes increase or decrease happiness. So I think you're exactly right, Oli. I think we should do that. And Bhutan famously has this gross national happiness measure, and I think it can be done. Yeah. Let's let Boris jump in because I think we're getting short on time and he's been so patient.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. And it's okay. I work with Ollie, so I'm used to him jumping in ahead of me and taking up all the air in the room. So I'll try to be quick while we have time, but it's a really fascinating presentation, super relevant to what Ollie and I do. And I was curious about the choice of kind of terminology. And I saw there that you've written a book called Immersion, and I've just gotten it on Kindle because I think that's something that I need to read. But I wanted to understand your choice of that word because we work in the sort of cross-cultural space. We try to create cross-cultural experiences for leaders, and that's based partly in other neuroscientific kind of work showing that cross-cultural experiences perhaps could be the kind of moments that you're talking about. And we use the term immersion a lot because we're going quite deep. Immersion to me is a sort of there's a depth element, right? Or so, at least such is the metaphor when we talk about cultural immersion. And I was just wondering if you chose that word intentionally to speak to moments that are necessarily deep or not, because you also reference like, watching football with my buddies or like a quick hug from my daughter, which are like wonderful, important moments, but I don't think of them necessarily as sort of really, really deep, right? As compared to like a long, in-depth conversation with your daughter about her life, for example, or with your friend instead of watching sports. So am I misunderstanding the choice of that word, or is there like a depth element here that's relevant statistically from your research?
No, just trying to get an evocative word. The original word for it was zest, which stood for Zach Engagement Statistic. But I always try to get my name out of things. So I agree with you. So there's a little interesting neurophysiology here that I'll just take 60 seconds to talk about, which is when you initially meet someone new, you actually generally have a higher immersion response than for people you already know. And that's specifically because if I know that my wife is safe and I've seen her for 30 years, I don't actually need to have a big response. It's too energetically costly. It's more efficient to just pull from long-term memory. So, so meeting new people, being in new environments actually is a great way to stimulate this kind of peak immersion moments that are so valuable to you. So I think the work you're doing sounds really important. And I used to be very skeptical of these organizations that be like, oh, we're taking our team whitewater rafting. I'm like, oh, what a waste of money. But actually, if you think of the physiology of that, I'm isolating you. I'm making you depend on each other. You build some social ties. This is like Kat's question, under moderate stress, and Dan's question. I want that stress response. Oh, that's a great way to build teamwork really efficiently, is put you in a little bit of danger, and then you get to know it. So yeah, it sounds like what you're doing is brilliant.
Great, thank you. Do you mind if I ask one more question since I'm the
Go for
last
it.
one? Is that okay, Karen?
Sure.
I wonder also, I mean, I'm glad you've come around on the kind of experiences that we've created. I think, a big part of it is also like being physically together, right? Like a lot of the way we've designed our programming is thinking about how we are all super connected, like as we are at this moment from all around the world. But that seems to be almost like inversely related to the amount of in real life physical interactions and engagements that people are having, or certainly like younger people. And yet I live in Kenya and my parents live in the US. So it's important for me to have regular touch points with them. And I rely on technology to do that. And it's wonderful. And they can see my kids. But have you found any kind of like significant difference in the sort of value of these moments that involve others when they're digital versus physical?
Yeah, great question. So pre-COVID, we actually did research on this, and we found that this 2D interaction gives people between 50 and 80% of the in-person interaction neurologically. Surprisingly high to me, right? So I think so the 50 to 80 depends on who you're interacting with, right? Your parents, your kids, different ball game than some random person. So I think it's the same. I don't think the brain cares about where we get the social emotional value from. So I think it's like something that Karen and I do all the time, which is cry at movies. Neurologically, that's super weird, right? If you're cognitively intact, you're not on drugs, you're aware of where you are, you know it's a fictional story, you know these are paid actors. At the end of the movie, when the boy dies or the girl dies, people cry. Why? What the heck's wrong with you, human? Well, it's because we're so socially tuned, sorry, we're so tuned neurologically to social interactions that we just transport ourselves into that environment. And it's really beautiful. That's where empathy comes from. So yeah, I don't think the 2D, again, when we started doing this research, I thought, oh, it's going to be terrible. It'd be 5%. It's actually really high. So I think if we have great meetings like this, thank you, Karen, so much for setting this up. We really get a lot of value from that. And in person, again, I'm getting touch, I'm getting smell, I'm getting, other senses. So it's going to be higher. So in real life, the best, but I think 2D is not a bad substitution.
Fascinating. Thank you
for the
for that.
questions. I'll report back on my app how engaging this meeting was, Paul.
Okay. Let's see.
Emotional fitness app. And lastly, Aisha had a question about in the chat about whether or not they can use the app for measurement and research interventions.
They can. Yeah, we have a number of groups using it, and other people have published research with it as well. So yeah, to email me, happy to send you info.
Okay, and then lastly, some questions about if people have follow-up questions for you, Paul. Is it okay if I pass along your info post-meeting?
For you guys, yes.
Okay.
A friend of Karen is a friend of mine, so.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And Paul, you're so generous. Really appreciate the information. I actually have so many more questions too, but maybe we'll have to do part 2.
Anytime. Thank you guys
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Really enjoyed it. Bye.